Who are these people?
Can we
Yeah,
could
well,
we could we
even
throw this guy out?
well, speaking of us, meanwhile, like the French establishment is doing that to them, and meanwhile, our establishment is doing this to us. But I mean, this was kind of, and look, we've reported on this for a while. I've mentioned it in several live streams ago that this is happening. It's happening in next month.
Hmm.
But aspect of our emergency actually just ended Monday.
Yeah.
So this I think this kind of went under the radar kind of this week. But I felt it was important to report on this. But Joe Biden, I would say almost kind of quietly, ended our national emergency in regards to COVID. All right. This article is from Politico, written by Kelly Garrett, where she says, actually, you can zoom out. Thank you. The White House initially announced plans to extend the national emergency as well as the public health emergency until May 11th. So, just to clarify, Biden has not ended the public health emergency. That's still going on until May, but the national emergency is done. So we're no longer in pandemic mode, as you could say.
Yeah. Which
So
means we're
President
not.
Joe Biden.
Which mainly
Go
means
ahead.
we're not gonna have things like rent assurance and
Right.
like it's no
So
more money, people. It's over.
So no more money. And as I said, if you have bills, any of those medical bills or any bills that could probably go in collections because they have not gone after people, from what I understand, quite as hard, if at all, fuck that now. Like now will go after you now. So please make sure if you do have any of those extraneous bills that can, go into collections and fuck up your credit, please take care of that as soon as possible.
Please.
But anyway, Biden on Monday signed a House bill immediately ending the COVID-19 national emergency, first enacted during the Trump administration in 2020. The White House initially announced plans to extend the COVID-19 national emergency as well as a public health emergency until May 11th. But shortly after, House Republicans put forth bills to end both imminently. The bill that the president signed into law on Monday ended only the national emergency. The White House voiced opposition to the bill, saying the resolutions would be a grave disservice to the American people. But you signed the bill anyway, so okay. In a statement of administration policy, the Biden administration said that an abrupt end to the emergency declarations would create wide-ranging chaos and uncertainty throughout the healthcare system. Despite this, Biden told Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer last month that he did not plan to veto it, marking the second time in recent weeks that the president has signaled opposition to a Republican-sponsored bill, only to later decline to veto it. Last month, Biden told the Senate that he would not veto a GOP-backed bill that would repeal changes to the D.C. criminal code, a move that came as a surprise to Democrats. Ending the national emergency would end the use of some waivers for federal health programs meant to help healthcare providers during the height of the pandemic. The law Biden signed Monday did not affect the public health emergency, which is still set to expire in May, along with the Trump-era Title 41 border policy. We have talked about that before on this show.
Yep.
In a statement of administration policy objecting to the GOP bills seeking to end the pandemic emergencies, the White House warned that an abrupt end to the public health emergency and Title 42 would prove particularly problematic and could allow thousands of immigrants per day into the country immediately without the necessary policies in place.
Yep.
Oh, so actually that's it. So very short article. So yeah, as Misty says.
Oh, yes.
We're fucked.
Yep.
Yep.
But yeah, this has been a while coming, and as I said, many streams ago, and I'm still making this prediction. The second half of this year is going to be a dark one for many people.
Yep.
Like COVID, whatever you want to say. Basically, now the Biden's saying without saying, as I said earlier, COVID is now endemic. So
Yep.
now, any care that you need, you're basically on your own. And considering our shitty healthcare, considering how people weren't helped, still are not being helped, and basically giving the middle finger now, like definitely by May.
Well, bad cookies in the chat. Gee, wonder why they hired so many IRS agents. Yeah, yes.
Well, yeah, and
yeah,
yes, and again, this is kind of the plot. Again, this is not the IRS. That's not for the millions, billionaires, corporates.
Yeah.
This is for us. And again, like they've been in limbo for the last 3 years because they had no justification. They couldn't, go after people like us in terms of any bills or anything like that. But now they can. So, but I did want to play this clip from PBS NewsHour regarding this end essentially to COVID emergency and the implications of that, especially for those. And you can make the argument for like financial whatever, but there's still the idea of people still having long COVID. That's something that Jimmy Dore has reported on, and then other people have reported on that still are trying to make do with it.
And that he still has to say things like that. That's not the case because CDC guidelines haven't changed. So but YouTube, which goes off the CDC guidelines, I mean, he literally has said multiple times before everyone else that we were working towards it, that this is going to be endemic, that like most everyone will get it. So,
but it's the idea of long COVID, which I know a few of my friends have.
Yes.
And it's a new thing.
Johnny Graz.
People forget, like, this is a new thing that needs to be studied in terms of how to properly treat people, especially since, from what I understand, people have different symptoms regarding long COVID.
Yeah. And they aren't going to help you now. Now that this crisis is over.
They're not going to help you now. Right. They're not going to help you now. We don't have universal health care.
And unless you say those vaccines also injured, you're not going to get that either.
Right.
So
I do want to play, and you can play the whole thing. But actually, there's someone in here that might be surprised. You might be surprised as to having long COVID. So, but yeah, you can go ahead and play the clip.
Since the start of the pandemic, both former President Trump and President Biden have repeatedly renewed a special declaration of a national and public health emergency. But the government's approach toward COVID has dramatically changed. And yesterday, the president said he would allow that emergency declaration to end in May. William Brangham looks at what that will mean.
Now, this is the government essentially saying that COVID-19 isn't as grave a threat as it once was, and thus certain policies can be phased out. House Republicans have been pressuring the administration to make this exact move. But COVID is still killing more than 500 Americans every single day on average, and has cumulatively killed well over 1 million of us. Joining me now is Lawrence Gostin, who tracks all of this very closely. He's at Georgetown University's Global Health Institute. Larry Gostin, great to have you back on the program. I mentioned the GOP pressure on the administration. House Republicans just introduced this bill called the Pandemic is Over Act, which would basically do what the administration says they're going to do. Do you think the administration wanted to do this, or is this bowing to political pressure?
I think it's a little of both, William. I mean, certainly all emergencies have to come to an end, and we've been at this COVID emergency for 3 years now, originally with President Trump declaring it in January 2020. But there has been enormous pressure. I mean, it's certainly from Congress, it's from Republican governors, it's from the public that just seems to be so fatigued and over COVID, and even from its own agency. The Food and Drug Administration is planning on cycling to seasonal COVID shots the way we do flu shots. So all of this is a strong political signal that we need to move on, but we need to have a soft landing. And I think that's why the administration has put this back until May 11th.
So practically speaking, when the government says that the public health emergency is over, what does that mean? What follows?
Well, first we have to be clear that, the crisis is still here, and particularly for the vulnerable. You mentioned more than 500 deaths a day. That's, twice the average flu season, but that's in a severe flu season. We've got, COVID exploding in China. We've got variants and subvariants that are on the horizon. And so for the young and healthy, it may be over, but for the vulnerable, it's not. What this is going to mean is that it's going to unravel a whole social safety net. People will find it harder to get health insurance, particularly Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, Veterans Administration benefits, and even private insurance. It'll start to cost money for tests, therapeutics, and ultimately for vaccines as we transition to the private market. That means that the uninsured, the underinsured, the poor are going to really lack access the way they've been accustomed to doing it now. CDC is going to have a lot more trouble getting data from the states and doing surveillance. And there's also implications even for Title 42, which is the program that expels asylum seekers coming to the United States.
What is the implication for Title 42? Because I know that this has been another one of these political hot potatoes that has been fought over. If you declare the emergency is over, does that change Title 42 in any real way?
It actually does. Title 42 itself is not dependent on a formal declaration of a public health emergency. But if you actually look at CDC's original order, the order says that it stays in place until CDC decides to take it down or until a formal declaration of emergency is over. So on May 11th, like it or not, Title 42 is gone unless for some reason CDC would to issue a fresh order. CDC won't do that because my understanding is CDC has never been in favor of this because it's really not justified by public health. It's really more a border control policy and an inhumane one at that.
You wrote on Twitter that this is the equivalent of waving the white flag of surrender. Do you really think that that's the case? I mean, given as you're describing that Congress has kind of done this, the American public has certainly decided we're done with this. So what are we surrendering to?
I worry that when the next variant or subvariant comes, that it has more immune escape ability, perhaps even more pathogenic or deadly. That when CDC says put on a mask or get your booster shot, that people's eyes may roll. And I think it's fine for the young and the healthy, but I really worry about the poor, the uninsured, those with deep underlying health conditions and vulnerabilities. I think they are at grave risk, and that's what really worries me the most. I do understand, and I agree with President Biden that all emergencies do eventually come to an end, but I wish we would be able to have a safe landing in the sense that we really protect the health care insurance and social safety net for the most vulnerable among us because they're still at grave risk.
Larry Gostin of Georgetown University, always good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I appreciate it.
Actually, I thought that was another clip that I was going to show but did not put in here. But actually, Tim Kaine actually has long COVID.
Okay.
But you notice what that doctor said at the very end?
Yeah, I mean, I was my inside my head, I was just like that's pretty much, yeah. I mean, he wished. I think what was it? He wished that the next iteration of he said very specifically, not like next virus, like next variation, right? So
yeah,
like to be more deadly. That's what he said.
right.
So that like people took it more seriously and would wear their mask.
Right.
Like,
but he also said, but he also said, you know, the calls for boosters and all of that for the young and healthy will just roll their eyes and that will be okay.
yeah.
There have been plenty of people in this space for the last 3 years that have been saying that. Most notably Jimmy Dore, who has said this. But those people were shunned. Those people had their channels basically taken down in the name of saying that as misinformation, that everyone had to get a shot. You didn't have a choice. If you didn't, then you couldn't do a damn thing.
It's safe and effective, Collin. Collin is safe and
but
effective.
Now it's the idea of like, oh, now we're kind of over it. It's like, okay.
It definitely reduces transmission. It definitely does. It still does.
Right. But it's the idea of like he said, like if you're old and vulnerable, then which was what people were saying.
Yes.
From the beginning.
Yes.
Focus on, and this is when I first watched Jimmy Dore, like more especially, you know, that's what he was saying. Focus on the older and the vulnerable first.
Yeah.
And then everyone else can take care of after that. But instead, they kind of lumped us all together. And then once the vaccine was available, it's like everyone had to take it or else. And the people who were very hesitant, who made us think about it, got called names, got called everything but a child of God. And the media kind of went along with all of that for up until now. Like the idea of like, you know, it's now okay to be like almost against the vaccine or boosters now. Whereas over a year ago or 2 years ago, that wasn't the case at all. So it's just kind of funny now that the threat is over and like Pfizer and all these other big pharma have gotten their money and will continue to get more money because now you have to pay for COVID tests now. You're no longer going to get them for free.
Which a lot of businesses will still require them. I'm betting.
Right.
And
even with them, they have an expiration date. So you can't use them like after like I probably have like maybe 10 of them right now that I probably can't. I have to check, but technically actually they don't work. Like you don't get a read off of them, at least the ones I have, like after a certain point. So they may be shot now that I probably will have to end up throwing them away. And now you have to pay like upwards of $20 for them now. Like in the pharmacy or whatever.
But Jimmy was on this endemic crap for a long time. I mean, he was listening to smarter people in the room as well, you know.
Right.
Plenty of doctors said the same thing.
And people in our space, like Rob Durgan, like our brother in the network, was saying all of this too. Way back when.
Webb, Whitney, definitely.
Franco, all those folks were kind of Slow News Day.
Convo.
All those folks called us out.
Yeah.
And
got
their
people.
channels essentially
Peter McCullough, like bunch of doctors, the Barrington Declaration, all those cats, you know. So all said the same thing, and they were called quacks for saying it was going to be endemic. So you know, fun stuff.
And now without saying it is. So, but like I said, try and get your bills together. If you know, because not to say we got help, but we're definitely not going to get any help now.